Hi, everyone. Today we're going to take a little drive down the GW Parkway to Mount Vernon to explore George Washington's home and gardens and our favorite stop, the reconstructed distillery. We're going to taste the estate's small batch ryes, visit the working grist mill, and hear how Washington's operation became one of the largest whiskey producers of its day. Along the way, we'll swap a few tasting notes, share travel finds and island trips, and get a close-up look at the 18th century water-powered milling and handcrafted distilling. It's a reminder of how whiskey used to be practical, seasonal, made by hand, and those roots still shape the whiskey we drink today. Between history and pours, we'll talk about life, friendship, and why stepping away for a few hours with a good friend can clear your head. So pour something you enjoy and join us for some whiskey, history, and a little honest conversation from Mount Vernon. Welcome to the Whiskey Tourist. I'm Eric.
And I'm Gabe.
We're two friends exploring the world through whiskey, one pour at a time.
Each episode will take you to new destinations, uncover local whiskey culture, and share the flavors, traditions, and people that make every place unique.
So grab a glass, pack your curiosity, and come along for the ride. Welcome back to the show, everybody. So today, Gabe and I are going to dive into George Washington and his whiskey-making operation at Mount Vernon here in Northern Virginia. And we'll talk a little bit about Alexandria, just outside of Washington, D.C. But before we get into all of that, I've got to ask Gabe, what are we drinking here today, my friend?
Yeah, so this is the coffee rye. Coffee-flavored rye.
So you've got the singularities, the coffee-flavored, coffee-infused rye from Epoch. Yeah, nice. I literally just opened this.
Oh.
Ardbeg Smoke Trails Manzanilla cask, which I picked up on my last trip and have now just... first time opening it up. It's a travel exclusive, or at least it was initially released as a travel exclusive. And Ardbeg has a whole line of these, and they're all various wine casks that they're finishing in. And I think they've done it with like a Pinot or a Cabernet or something before. It should be interesting. I've heard good things about it. So,
all right. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
You know, when after we bought this coffee flavor rye, we had some family over this was like a couple of months ago, I guess. We had some family over, cousins and their spouses, and I did a tiramisu. So instead of doing Kahlua or doing the regular coffee liqueur, I used this one to, soak up in the ladyfingers. And it was really, really good because it's a smoky. It is, of course, coffee flavor, but it's a smoky. It does have, at the end, you can taste kind of like you have a coffee pot sitting on the coffee maker for a little too long. You get that feeling at the end.
It's a little burnt.
Yeah, a little burnt coffee, smoky, but it's really nice. Really nice. So how about yours?
This is pretty good. It's a little salty, kind of the same. A little salty, a little nutty, like a little, can't quite put my finger on it. It's interesting. It doesn't have as thick of a mouthfeel as I would have thought. With the Manzanilla, which is basically a type of sherry cask.
Yep.
And it's 46%, so it's got a little bit more kick than a standard.
Yeah, this is 40 and it's 80 proof, so it's not that much of a kick, but it's good.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's a little seaweed kind of scent, ocean scent to it, a little anise, like licorice anise to it, just a touch.
Interesting.
No, it's nice. It's very nice.
Interesting.
I like it.
You know what? Next time you come over, I do have a bottle of this orange wine that they produce down in Peru. It's around the Pisco area where they do actually Pisco, which is a place where it's close to the sea. And now that you're talking about seaweed, those notes, this orange, so this orange wine does have that same salty seaweed type of feel in the mouth. So I'll be interested to know how you feel about this because now I'm so much into orange wines. They're very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting twist. I haven't had too many of them before, but I've heard good things. So curious to check those out. Yeah, I've got that. And speaking of other things that I've picked up on my travels, we'll bust out this bottle at some point. But I picked up a French single malt from the Loire Valley when we were in St. Martin. I picked it up from a French liquor store there. So we'll open that one up next time around.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So,
it's
and talking about Manzanilla, I told you that we have a cousin in Spain. She's going through a difficult time health-wise. So it has come to the situation. It's now worsened. So we're thinking about going to see her next month. But at the same time, next month is our anniversary. So we're kind of tying in.
Oh, you're going to add a little happy, a little sad.
Exactly. The bittersweet. It's always, the bittersweet. And while I'm up there, I'm thinking, well, duty freeze in probably Portugal and Spain. We'll see.
And, there's the duty freeze that you could check out. There's some Portuguese and Spanish whiskeys as well. So things to look for. Yeah. So, alrighty then. Let's see. Have we had caught up since? We haven't caught up.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we caught up since I got back from Anguilla.
Yep. Correct.
Yeah.
So it's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah. It's been 2 or 3 weeks now.
Yep.
So that was a nice trip.
Yep.
And in that case, I was able to hit the duty free. And on the way out, so it was kind of funny. We got down to Miami and waiting for our connecting flight. And we're wandering around and I hit the duty free and they're like, they had some stuff. And then I was like, oh, they have this whole different shop called World of Whiskey at the Miami airport. And I get it's all the way over a concourse away. It's I don't know, 50 gates away or something. So I get over there and it's all the same junk that's in the regular duty free. And I'm like, except it's just whiskey. And I'm like, well, that seems like a bait and switch. I went all this way just to check you out. They had all the same junk.
All the same thing. Oh,
yeah. So, anyhow, but that is, I picked up in Miami on the way down to Anguilla is where I picked up the Ardbeg smoke trails.
Okay.
Which I'd been looking for a little while. On the previous trip, I'd been looking for it, and they didn't have it in any of the duty frees that I visited. So this was kind of a nice pickup. I've been wanting to try it for a while, so that was a nice pickup there. And then, of course, we had a lovely time down in Anguilla, and we're beach bums, kind of,
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah. It's like a suburb of St. Martin. There are no cruise ships. You can fly in direct, you can fly into St. Martin and take a ferry over. And no cruise ships, though, coming into Anguilla. So it's kind of quiet, just super, super laid back. And there's nothing really to do but chill on the beaches and go snorkeling and swimming and eat all sorts of delicious food. So,
and it was your anniversary trip too, right?
It was, 15 years. Yeah, wow. 15 years.
15 years, you're getting up there. It's going to be our 19th year.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know how Milagros keeps up with me, but hey.
I always joke and say, every year she renews the contract. So
exactly.
She's like, I'll keep you another year.
I'll keep you another year. That's fine.
Yeah. And then, of course, when we, like I said, when we were in Anguilla, then we hopped over took a ferry over. It's 20 minutes by boat to St. Martin and to the French side, which we hadn't been to. And that was fun. That's where I found the liquor and wine shop. Very lovely store. It was Vins de France. And they had a nice selection of single malts. Some of the stuff you could find in other places like regular Scotch, but they also had a nice selection of French single malts. And so I was like, so I picked one up. So it's an interesting peated single malt from the Loire Valley in France. So we'll bust that open sometime and try it together.
Yes. That's and I always wonder because these islands, in the Caribbean, we have French islands, we have Dutch islands. Do they really speak French and Dutch in those islands, or
English is spoken a lot?
Okay, yeah.
Various versions of Creole or island kind of is spoken in some places. So it's a little French, a little Creole. There's some Dutch spoken on the
Okay.
Dutch side of St. Martin and other
Mhm.
places, but you get a lot, mostly English in the ports,
Yeah.
mostly English where, because you get a lot of cruise ship traffic, English is pretty universal down there.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Like
Mhm.
for instance, I was talking. I don't know if
Mhm.
I was talking to a colleague, and I was
Mhm.
telling them that sometimes when you go to South America, you go like for instance to Brazil, and there is a big Japanese population in Brazil and in Argentina as well. So when you go there, and it's kind of weird, me speaking Spanish, and when you speak with an Argentinian, they have an accent. So, like for instance, the double L, instead of saying like the word llama in Spanish, it's llama. But for Argentinian Spanish, it's not llama, it's shama. It's a different kind of way, the dialect, I guess, how they speak it. But when you see a Japanese Argentinian, they speak like Argentinians. And for me, it's like, whoa, what's going on? So I imagine the same things in the Caribbean. You see Caribbean
Mhm.
people talking in Dutch and French and
Mhm.
Creole and all of that. Is like interesting.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's a completely different, dialect, like, between anything about like Cajun,
Yeah,
Creole Cajun down in New
New
Orleans and that
Orleans.
and
Yeah.
Louisiana, or it's my wife is from Brooklyn
Uh-huh.
originally, and I'm from North Carolina, so we both speak English.
Especially you coming from the South.
Well, why don't we jump into our topic today? Welcome everybody back to the show. I know we had a little break here in between with some travel and other stuff going on, but back this week, and we have been down to visit Mount Vernon down in Virginia, just over the Potomac from Washington, and visiting our good friend and founding father George Washington's home, Mount Vernon, and more specifically visiting his distillery. So, do you want to get right into it?
Yep, let's go ahead and do it. So first off, I guess it's safe to say that this episode almost didn't happen. A few weeks ago, when Eric and I planned the trip, at that time when we had scheduled that weekend, honestly, I have to say that I was very close to canceling. I was dealing with some, personal family stuff. One of those situations where life just decides to hit you all at once. A close family member was going through some serious health scare, and it turned into one of those weekends where your brain is mush, and it's at the same time it's in 10 different places at the same, so everything feels urgent, everything is heavy. But then when you think about whiskey, it kind of feels ridiculous at the same time, I guess. But funny enough, I think it ended up being exactly what I needed. So anyway, I kept thinking about canceling. My mind was full. I had my brother traveling to help with everything. And emotionally, I wasn't there, fully there. But you know what? I thought life happens. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is step out of your chaos, go for a few hours, go somewhere else, beautiful, and spend some time with a good friend, and let just your brain breathe. And thankfully we didn't cancel, and I'm glad we didn't, because not only we ended up having a fantastic whiskey day, a great day, but the whole trip ended up being kind of cathartic for me, and I guess that's what this episode is about.
Yeah, so a touch of medicinal whiskey and a change of scenery sometimes will work wonders for you.
Yep, exactly. And the nice thing about Mount Vernon, it's basically in our backyard.
Yeah.
So it's just heading down to Alexandria, just a short drive south, and nothing dramatic. But even the drive, you start getting into the mood.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just over the river and through the woods. On the way to George's house, we go. So from DC, for those of you who might not be in the area, it's just on the Virginia side of the Potomac. You hop over and go down the aptly named George Washington Parkway, and you'll go through Arlington and Alexandria, and you'll keep on going. It's a beautiful drive, goes right down the banks of the Potomac. And in the spring, it's just absolutely stunning. Probably one of my favorite drives in the entire whole, Washington area here is going down the GW Parkway, head to Mount Vernon in the spring. Everything's popping. You got the river right there. It's, flowers are out, trees are flowering. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's really incredibly relaxing. It's very zen. It's a great, like, radio up, windows down kind of drive.
Yeah, and I think for us, we picked the right time because it was early spring, perfect weather, bright sun, blue skies. Just one of those days that everything feels like it lined up exactly right. Because even parking was easy, probably because it was still early in the season, which surprised me. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, you know what? Times that I've been there, it was packed, like full tourist mode. So, but this time I think it was peaceful, it was calm, plenty of space to park and to enjoy. So I highly recommend that, to go not right in the middle of the season, but I mean, if you end up going into any season, it's fun. But if you go early spring or late fall, just do it. I think it's a better experience.
Yeah, the shoulder months are always great, but had some nice energy. It wasn't as busy as other times, but it's a great family outing if you got kids. A lot of open space for them to run around and hopefully pick up a little history while they're there. So it's absolutely beautiful, beautiful space. They're doing a little bit of renovation or restoration to it right now. So the front lawn, the lawn behind the mansion that faces the Potomac, which is also just a gorgeous view. So that's all kind of torn up right now, and they're resodding that lawn. But that is also just one beautiful view of the river there. George picked a brilliant spot.
I think you and I, Eric, we have done the full mansion tour before, individually. So this last time, we kind of skipped the formal house tour. But for anyone going for the first time, I think that they should absolutely do it. Can do guided tours. They also have a great self-guided option through an app, I think, so you can move on your own pace. Even without going inside this time around, the grounds alone are worth it. As you said, it's beautiful. The mansion overlooks the Potomac and the views are stunning. You've got the gardens, you've got the trees, the open lawns, the river. It's peaceful. So like you said, you understand very quickly why George loved this place. But one thing surprised me, and I guess I kind of knew it, but I didn't register in my brain until that day when they started talking that George Washington married up. And listen, I respect that. Apparently, even though Washington, of course, came from a solid family, a huge part of his real wealth, and actually the whole state, came through his marriage to Martha Washington. Well, at that time, Martha Custis, right?
Custis, yeah.
And honestly, I mean, same respect. I'm not saying I didn't bring anything to my marriage, but I will say with full confidence, I married up as well. So my wife definitely upgraded the entire operation. So respect.
Yeah, he made his money the old-fashioned way. He married into it.
Exactly.
But absolutely gorgeous. To give you an idea of scale, too. I mean, that would take, if you want to do the grounds and the whole operation there, and this is just a fraction, right, of what the estate was in its glory before, it was broken up and sold off over the years. It's, give yourself 3 or 4 hours just to see all the grounds, the gardens, the mansion, the farming operation, all, it is an incredibly large operation. It functioned almost as a city unto itself. In its heyday, they grew all their fruits and vegetables and grains and all of that. All their livestock was done there. All pretty much everything you need to live was done on site. So it's a huge, huge operation. So give yourself plenty of time to tour the grounds, and I would highly recommend it. And do you remember when we were walking out of the gardens and the gate closed behind us? I was like, wait a minute, did you close that gate?
They just kicked us out.
No, I swear there was a ghost in that garden. It was a self-closing gate.
Yes, yes.
First it was open, then it shut, and we didn't touch it, and I have no idea.
I mean, you're gonna spend the whole afternoon right there, even the whole day if you go and plan it well with your kids or your family, because they even have a restaurant in there. They have the what's called the Mount Vernon Inn, I believe
Mhm.
it's called, right? And they have right, and they have a well, they have a full restaurant and they have a full bar. That's where we headed next.
That is key. Yes, the bar, number one stop after we did the tour. And but don't skip the museum portion of that as
Of
well. They have a
course,
really
yeah.
great interactive museum, but once you're done with all the grounds, like Gabe said, you gotta hit the restaurant and bar before you leave.
And the reason why we ended up going into, well, not the only reason, right? But one of the reasons we ended up in the bar was because if you go to the, because they have a shop, a big shopping area right there, they sell the whiskeys, rye from their own distillery, from the George Washington Mount Vernon distillery. And when we saw, I remember seeing the prices, they were pretty pricey. I think each bottle it's around $200.
It's about 200 for 375,
Yep,
so half size of your standard bottle. But that's because it's incredibly labor intensive
of
and
course.
it's the smallest of small batch whiskeys that you will find anywhere in the world, as you'll see in a minute.
Yeah, and well, and the thing is that, I mean, it's not that I'm, counting pennies or anything like that. It's just that if you're thinking about buying a bottle of 200 or $250 bottle, you should be sure that that whiskey is good. So anyway, we went to the bar to taste it before we thought about buying any bottles. And I think the bar, well, because they do have different variations of the rye, which is, I think it's something that they produce every year, rye. So they did have a couple of their variations, right?
They had a 2 year, which is more like a 3 year, and then they had the 4 year rye. So they had a younger rye and then a slightly older rye, which
Which
is
was,
interesting.
yeah, which was really interesting because when you think about aging process and the flavors that it brings, all the aromas and the flavors and the feeling that you get from the aging, you would think that the older one, it's, well, I mean, tastier, or I don't want to say better, but it's just it takes a little longer time, right? Resting. But for me, I have to say that the younger one was kind of surprised me, being a rye, because you know me, Eric, I'm not such a rye drinker.
Yeah, so they were good. I know you like the younger one a little better and I like the slightly older one a
Yeah.
little better. And the character, it's interesting, changed just a little bit between the two. I think the younger was a little more floral, a little lighter and more delicate, surprisingly, and the older one was a little oakier, but mostly it was just a little spicy, but very kind of mellow and sweet. It's not a These certainly aren't high rye. The
Yeah.
ryes, these aren't
Yeah.
95.5 ryes at
Yeah.
all. These are a much more mellow kind of a rye here.
Yeah, and after tasting them, I mean, I have to be honest, I think that the price, like you said, it's a very small operation. It's a labor of love. And also it's kind of like how do you call it? One of those special kind of bottles that you don't see anywhere else. It's from the George Washington Mount Vernon mansion, so of course you wanna buy kind of like for a novelty purposes, I
Mhm.
guess, too. But these are really good, solid products, I have to say. I think they were good.
So, what I would say, particularly if you're thinking about buying a bottle, if you want to get a bottle of this for like a novelty kind of thing, I would, just put it on your shelf. That's cool. You're like, hey, I got Washington's whiskey. But if you want to try it, you could do two things. You could certainly go to the bar, or if you've got some friends, let's say if you've got, I don't know, if you've got 4 or 5 buddies and you just want to try it, go buy a bottle.
Yeah,
And this is certainly no shade to the bar, right? They got to make their overhead,
of course.
and if it's just you and you don't want to go to this trouble, it's certainly cheaper to go to the bar. But if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 of you and of your buddies that like this and you want to give it a shot, go buy a bottle, split the cost, and your per pour cost will be less than buying it at the bar.
Oh yeah.
There you split a bottle and in an afternoon, split it 4 or 5 ways, and you're getting it for about half the cost that it would be at the bar.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I agree with that. Now I think comes the after that came the best part, I guess,
Mhm.
for us, which was the meal. Because honestly, that was the whole reason why we ended up going to the trip. It was my first time going there, so I know the mansion is beautiful, the grounds are incredible, history is amazing. But I mean, let's be honest, we came for the whiskey, and to get to the meal, you actually have to drive a little south, farther south from the main, Vernon state, maybe a mile, mile and a half. So that's where the distillery operation comes, to life. The distillery and the mill. I know it's a reconstruction, of course, but it gives you a really strong sense of what whiskey production looked like. Think about it, more than 250 years ago.
Yeah, so why don't we jump into that a little bit and take it back to how this all happened, right? So
Yep.
getting the start, right? So George Washington, we've won the revolution, and we have, we got our own country set up, and he's been president and yada yada yada. And now he's like getting ready to slip into retirement, right? And he's like, I want to laid back, quiet retirement. I've done all this stuff that I want to do. I just want to live out my days on this beautiful estate in Virginia. And along comes his farm manager, who was a fellow by the name of Scotsman by the name of James Anderson. And he grew up in a little bit outside in Edinburgh. And he says, hey, this is a great location, where you can grow all of our grains here, and we have a great water source. You got a creek right here on your property, and we have our own grist mill, so we're grinding all of our own grains. By the way, you should check that out because it's really cool to see that
Oh,
in working
yes.
order. Really
Yes.
amazing. Still grinding everything old school.
Yeah, I mean,
And,
standing there, it hits you all differently because today, when you walk into a distillery and a mill, everything feels kind of polished, steel, automation, precision, consistency. But when you go here, you can see again, the labor of love.
Yeah, so they still grind all of their grain just like Washington did. So through with water powered grist mill with giant stones grinding everything is really just like mesmerizing to watch. But so James Anderson here, who grew up in Scotland, he knows a little bit about distilling because he ran farms in Scotland, and around this time, that's what you did in the winter months. You distilled your grains, right? That was just part of farm life in Scotland. And so he says, "Hey George, this is perfect. Can we try our hand at making some whiskey here?" And George says, "Well, I don't know. I'm kind of slipping into retirement. I don't really know anything about it, but sure, go ahead, give it a shot if you think there's something to it." So off James Anderson goes, distilling whiskey based on, primarily rye, right? Because
Yep.
that's what they had at the time. Bourbon really wasn't a thing quite at that point, at least not in this immediate area. And so he makes the first batch. And at this point, it's important to know that, at the time, this isn't like the age stuff, right? That we have now. This isn't stuff that's going to sit around and age for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This is basically coming off the steel as White Dog, going into a barrel, and as soon as they can run it up the road, Alexandria or across to Washington, and sell it, that's how it's going. And so it's cash on the barrel head right there. It's quick money, quick turnaround, and so they sold out almost instantly. So in 1798, the distillery was in operation. 1799. Washington, and that was the year of Washington's death. He had turned out something like almost 11,000 gallons of whiskey at from the farm at that point, and that was absolutely massive. I think that made Washington at that time like the biggest whiskey producer in fledgling America
In
at that
America, of
point. He
course.
was like the king of whiskey in America for
Yes.
for
Yes.
about a year. So anyway, but when they first started producing it, they created the White Dog, and then did their first distillation batch, sold out almost immediately. And so James Anderson writes back to George Washington and says, "Hey, we made all this rye. We sold out of all this rye. What should we do next?" And of course, Washington said, "Good Lord, man, get to it, double quick.
Exactly.
Make some more. It's cash money. Go make some more."
Yeah, but then also the romantic part in me when I'm listening to this story and when you go into that place, you can kind of like think about that every batch that they did was a little different depending on the grain and depending on the season, the fermentation, the temperature of that year, what was available in that year. Because like you said, usually it was more rye, sometimes more corn. They were not thinking about bourbon at that time, of course,
Hmm.
but sometimes it ended up more corn or more wheat or
Yep.
whatever they had. So they weren't trying to create a perfect luxury bottle for
Hmm.
Instagram. They were just making whiskey because that's what they it gave them money and that's what people did and that what people were drinking at that time and it was part of their daily life. It
Hmm.
was part of their plantation economy, I guess, part of farming, part of survival, part of their business.
Right, exactly. So, as a way of converting, just like I think we've talked about this before, even in the, talking about the Louisville episode, you would grind your grains, you would distill them, and then you would, that would be a way of a value added product, especially in the winter months, with of using some of your crop that might spoil. That might not save, or in this case with rye, which typically were cover crop for farmers, right? It's not their primary crop. It was basically something they used to enrich the soil and protect their fields when they weren't growing their primary crop. And they were able to monetize something that normally would not be, would just be tilled under. So it's incredibly resourceful also.
Definitely. So, I mean, think about whiskey production back then wasn't the exact science that we
Mhm.
have right now. It was very practical, like you said, very resourceful, and
Mhm.
I find that very fascinating because when we talk about bourbon today, for instance, when we were talking about bourbon in our Louisville episode, and I'll be honest, I personally lean more toward bourbon, as you know. There's the expectation of style, flavor profile, the mash bill, but back then wasn't that at all. It wasn't about this is our signature rye. It was more like this is what we have, this is what we're making, this is what we're drinking and what we're selling. And honestly, there's something beautiful about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, really cool to watch. Now, granted, they weren't like doing live production the day we were there
Yeah.
because it's incredibly hot and dangerous, and they don't want a lot of people in the midst of it because they're working with buckets of, so getting into the production methods, right? So they're working with these buckets of scalding hot water that's been heated up in a vat, and then you've got your mash, your grains, which are basically in wooden barrels, and they're dumping the scalding hot water into these barrels, and then they're mixing it, of course, by hand with these giant paddles, which is, body by rye. You've got, they're doing it's all day long, and they're mashing and they're cooking and they're tossing their yeast in here, and they're basically mashing, doing all their mash and fermentation in the wooden barrels, and then when it's ready, then they're taking these things and dumping it into, they had what, five copper pot
Yep.
stills
Yep.
there, and doing, one batch at a time in these things, so it would cook down in your traditional copper pot still with a worm tub cooling mechanism at the end. And yeah, so incredibly labor intensive production. It was interesting. When we were there, they said, there was a malting house on property too, which would have been cool to see, but they haven't found where that was yet. Yeah. And there's that housing development right behind them. So I think it's probably like under somebody's living room.
Well, and the thing is that it's standing there, and again, I understand that that's kind of like recreation, but just thinking about people that they were doing the same work 200, 250 years ago,
Mhm.
it was really, really cool. And speaking about 250 years, this year is a big one.
Mhm.
It's the 250 anniversary of the United States, which honestly feels kind of wild to say it out loud, especially in these times. And because Mount Vernon is doing some really special releases tied to the anniversary, right?
Well, they are putting out, I believe, a 6-year rye, and are they putting out a bourbon this year also, I believe.
Yep.
So that's also something incredibly cool to check out. Yeah, check out their website if you're thinking of coming up this way and see when those releases are going to be out. You can either go just to the distillery, or if you get a ground pass for the estate, that covers the whole thing, including the distillery.
And yes, they are going to be expensive, very expensive, I'm sure. So we already saw that on the regular bottles. Those are not definitely cheap, but for something like the 250th anniversary release, I'll be honest, I'll probably buy one or two, maybe one to drink and one to keep. Because I guess it's one of those purchases that kind of like reminds you the memories, and this one feels like one of those. Something you open years later and remember exactly where you were when you got it kind of bottle, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So this will be an interesting, if possibly collectible, but mostly keepsake, probably. But I may also consider making it out there with some of our buddies. I thought it was interesting too. You were talking a while ago about the. I thought it was funny. You were talking a while ago about the old production methods, and we were talking to one of the folks in the distillery. And, of course, I'm geeking out over here and asking about, did they do a wild fermentation, or are they pitching yeast and, all that kind of stuff. And I said, how did they decide where to make cuts, right? Because you're not, you don't have all the instrumentation and the spirit safe and everything that you have in a modern distillery. And one of the guides said, well, when we're distilling, I'll just sniff it and see if it smells right. And then if I'm feeling pretty brave that day, I'll stick my finger in and taste it. And it's like, well, she hasn't gone blind yet, so I guess it's okay.
This is the cool thing. I mean, I think it's one of my favorite travel tips in general. Talk to people who work there. Talk to the staff, because a lot of fun tidbits come from that. That's where the good stuff happens. We found out that you were talking, that you can actually volunteer at Mount Vernon and help and work on the grounds. And sometimes, if you're lucky, I guess, you might even get selected to help with the whiskey production. I'm sure. I mean, it's going to be kind of like a whole gym session to go ahead and start mashing those things by hand. I mean, not everybody wants to do that, but I think it might be cool if you are one of those, history buffs or nerds that you want to geek out. That's nice. And I'm sure there's a waiting list for that. But then even if you volunteer, it doesn't mean that you'll end up in the distillery, but it's kind of cool.
You could be out there chopping logs for the fire.
Exactly. We also learned that sometimes, even though it's not open for the public, but sometimes they do private tastings, I believe, and there are some special events that aren't always obvious unless you are connected to someone or connected to the staff or keep an eye on their calendar online. So when you go and visit, and it's not just related to Mount Vernon, it's anywhere you go, just ask questions, get to know the people, follow what's happening there, because there's usually something interesting going on behind the scenes that you don't know. And for whiskey people, that's where the real fun is.
That's where all the good stuff is.
Exactly.
You got to talk to people. You got to talk to the locals and find out the inside track on things. Like, you can go through and you could just do the tour and say, oh, that's nice to go, but you really get the good stuff when you start asking questions. We will definitely be back in the summer, and I think just really awesome experience there. And I know when they started, figuring out crafting the rye, I think if I remember right, they had a bunch of like the master distillers from the major distilleries came down, right, from like Kentucky and other places came out and kind of helped them with that. And I'm guessing, I'd be very curious to try the bourbon, because I'm guessing that they have something similar. I'd be curious to see who collaborated with them on the bourbon production process.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Definitely. I'm definitely going to be there there in the summer for the bourbon.
Yeah. All right. So, after that, we packed up and headed back up the road to Alexandria and made a stop for a little something to eat and another nip at one of our favorite stomping grounds in Old Town Alexandria, Virtue Feed and Grain, which is a really fantastic spot if you haven't been there.
Yeah. So, and honestly, if you've never been to Old Town Alexandria, I think you should. Old Town Alexandria is one of those places that feels like you kind of step into a different rhythm, even though it's really close to the city. It has the colonial charm, the brick sidewalks, the old buildings, the small independent shops, great restaurant, bars everywhere. It's one of my favorite places in the DC area. So just to walk around, grab a drink, spend an afternoon there. Um, and after a day of history and whiskey, it felt like the perfect place to finish, going to Old Town Alexandria and going to Virtue Feed and Grain.
Yeah. So it is really cool. And Alexandria is actually older than Washington, D.C. It's got a lot more history there. It dates back to the colonial days, as Gabe was saying, and has a ton of interesting history. They do a lot of really cool, like historical walking tours and things that go through there that you can check out. Very cool experience and a lot of great restaurants and shops and food. And Virtue Feed and Grain, I'm trying to remember, it used to be something else. Do you remember what that building was?
It used to be another. I think there was another restaurant there, wasn't it?
Oh, I was thinking older than that.
Older than that. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yeah.
I think that building dates back to the 1800s.
Definitely.
I think it was like a flour mill or something at one point.
Probably. Yeah, probably. And the reason we know Virtue Feed and Grain is because both Eric and I are part of this local group called Bourbon Beer and Cheer.
So I feel like a fool. It's right in the name. It was a feed house.
It was
it was a feed and grain. It was a grain house. Oh my gosh. Okay, never mind. I'm having a slow afternoon. It's right in the name. But they had some excellent pours. So if Virtue Feed and Grain, if it sounds familiar, some of you might have seen it. And Whiskey Advocate does every year they put out their list of I think it's like the 50 greatest whiskey bars around the country or something like that. Their list of great whiskey bars. And this one consistently makes it. It's probably one of the best, if not the best, bourbon bar in Northern Virginia, I would say. It's no Jack Rose, I will say that. Jack Rose is in a class by itself. But just over the river in Virginia, if you're staying closer to Alexandria and you don't feel like making the trip into Washington, which by all means, to go to Jack Rose, you totally should. But if you're not feeling like crossing the river, Virtue Feed and Grain is an amazing whiskey bar. Right.
Oh, yeah. They've got fantastic selection, bourbon, rye, scotch, everything. The people are nice. The bartender that day was great, super knowledgeable, easy to talk to. And it's always a huge blast when you're deciding what to try next. So we ended up tasting a couple of pours, I believe, and grab a few appetizers. And honestly, I think it was just perfect.
And if you're in Virtue Feed and Grain, you got to look for Big T.
Yes.
Tom Gale, Big T. I love him. He is absolutely fantastic, and he will talk your ear off about whiskey all day long. So it was a nice cap off to the day, and great food, great whiskey, and just a great location right there on the water again with Virtue to end the day before we headed off into the sunset.
Yeah, well, I remember it was kind of like a weird time because it was probably PM ish, not really lunch, definitely not dinner, and I think both of us had dinner plans later. So this was more of like a whiskey snack, break.
I like that, a whiskey snack. I like that.
Yeah, whiskey snack. The thing is that because of course, there's whiskey, but there's also life. There's the conversation. There's the perspective. So there was me probably unloading way too much personal chaos to you, Eric. So publicly, thank you, Eric.
Well, it's funny, we were talking about this, not just, we're getting together, but, some of our other buddies in our whiskey club there. And I was describing it to, one of our friends, and his wife says, "Oh, so it's like a book club." And I was like, "Yeah, kind of, but with whiskey instead of wine. But yeah, you get together and it's mostly about the company, right? The whiskey is nice. It's a bonus. Well, love the whiskey, but a lot of this is about the companionship.
The companion, the time, the trip, the friendship.
Well then, so you know what time it is.
Yes. It's last call. Okay, so you start. What's your best tasting of the day?
The best tasting of the day at Mount Vernon. I'm going to say, I think I think I'm gonna call the conversation with the staff there, where we learned about all this stuff about all the little tricks and tips about how they produce this and how they, grind the grist, and then getting into all the production and like the inside stories about the production were my favorites. That was my favorite thing, but of the whiskeys we tried that day, I rather liked that rum finished Penelope that I had at Virtue Feed and Grain. It was let me see if I can remember right. I wrote it down because it was so good. I was like, I need to go find a bottle of this. It was I have to look for it. It was a Penelope. Let me see. Was I have to look for it. Go ahead and
Sure.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll do mine, and I know that we usually talk about the best pour, the best bottle. So maybe for me, could have been the Mount Vernon Rye or one of the pours. I guess I think I got another Penelope also at Virtue Feed and Grain, but my last call, it's not a drink for me. It's the friendship. Yeah, I know. Cue the violins. Very Hallmark Channel. But honestly, I think it's true because when I think back to that day specific, sure, I remember the whiskey. I remember going and doing the tour. I remember the history. I remember the tasting notes, the conversations about the rye and how George Washington made whiskey and how he made the money. But what stands the most is the company, having a friend who shows up, a friend who listens, a friend who lets you talk through life while pretending you are both just analyzing the whiskey, I think for me, that's the real top shelf stuff. You are my good friend, brother. Thank you.
Look at you. You're laying down the love, and I'm over here going, yeah, the friendship's good, but that Penelope Havana was slamming.
The good people, the good whiskey, those are the ones that you remember.
Yeah, I remember it because I was having it with good company. So there you go.
Cheers, my friend.
And with that, we'll catch you next time.
All right.
And that's a wrap for this episode, folks. As always, you can find additional details and links for anything we talked about today in the show notes on our website at www.thewhiskeytourist.com. If you enjoy what you're hearing, do us a huge favor and hit that like and follow button and share this episode with a friend. You can find us on all the major platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, etc. And we also want to hear from you. We want your feedback. It helps us shape the show. Don't be shy. Send us your thoughts and suggestions. We're on Instagram at The Whiskey Tourist, or you can head over to our website, once again, www.thewhiskeytourist.com, and send us a note there. We're off to the next pour.
Catch you at the next stop.